Welcome to CapitolView, where we discuss the latest in Illinois state government and politics. My name is Hannah Meisel, and I'm with NPR Illinois. My guests this week are Kent Redfield, Emeritus Professor of Political Science at the University of Illinois, Springfield. Kent, thanks for being here.
Good to be here.
And Peter Hancock, reporter for Capitol News Illinois. Thanks for being here, Peter.
Hi, good to see you, Hannah.
I think, as always, top of mind for the last year has been COVID. Obviously, we are making great strides in Illinois with getting vaccinated, but that hasn't been even all over the state. In central Illinois, southern Illinois, access means, not terribly difficult. But in northern parts of the state, people have to wait in line, and it's been kind of confusing, but the governor finally got vaccinated this week. He took a one-dose Johnson & Johnson vaccine out at the Illinois State Fairgrounds at the National Guard run site there. That's always symbolic when, the head of state, the head of government, goes on TV and does something for the first time. Kent, do you think that maybe the governor waited too long in the name of, not wanting to be seen as jumping the line? Because there are real arguments that, he's asking everyone to take it himself, but he had waited until, almost the end of March. Do you think that that's really a thing, or do you think that people who are, annoyed at when he decided to do it are just making hay of?
Well, I think he would have taken criticism if he'd have done it earlier, because he's up in the Chicago area, and they have had a number of problems in terms of access up there. But I think it has symbolic value, and I think it's, when you've got the picture out there, it's always good. I would have liked to have seen him do it a little sooner. Our problem is shifting away from not having enough vaccine to do the shots, to trying to get access to communities and trying to convince people to take the shot. And it's going to make a significant difference how successful we are with getting people who either have problems getting appointments and getting access because where they live, are people that are reluctant and need, some encouraging. And so, it's kind of everybody on deck in terms of trying to figure out how to get that, 10%, 20%, whatever it's going to be, that's really going to make a difference in us getting to a level of herd immunity that's going to help us knock down the spikes and the variants that are inevitably going to come.
Right. And Peter, we are approaching April 12th, which is the day that all Illinoisans 16 and over will be eligible to get a vaccine. This is one of the major announcements the governor made last week. It was that, and then we are heading for this so-called bridge phase to phase 5, which, almost a year ago, the governor announced this 5-phase economic reopening plan. Phase 5 is basically normalcy, but no one was really able to envision back then what life would look like, 10 later. Would vaccines even be available this soon? So, Peter, refresh our memory. What is this bridge phase that the governor announced, and what does it mean for, I guess, the confidence of citizens and businesses, able to up the capacity limits and see kind of a light at the end of the tunnel?
Yeah, I think Dr. Ngozi Ezike described the transition from phase 4 to phase 5 as a dial, not a switch. Don't just flip a switch and reopen everything. So it's this gradual process. Once we have 70% of all the seniors age 65 and over have received at least their first dose, and as long as these other metrics, the number of deaths, the number of hospitalizations, the rate of spread, as long as those stay within a certain parameters, then we'll gradually start reopening. They will increase capacity limits. And then eventually, I guess it's when maybe 50% of all people have been vaccinated, they'll go to what they're calling full reopening. It's not entirely full. There will still be public safety guidelines. The mask mandate will stay in place until the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says to lift it. But other than that, everything should be back to normal. I'm not sure, people have been traumatized by this thing, and I'm not sure how quickly ordinary everyday citizens are going to be willing to go into crowded bars, go to karaoke parties where people are breathing, singing out loud. It may take, I'm not sure if we're going to go back to handshakes anytime soon. But gradually, it will look pretty much like normal, other than the mask staying in place.
Right. The masks staying in place, some people view that as, well, we're not truly returning to normal. Quite frankly, I enjoyed not having a cold or flu at all in an entire year. But yeah, right now, as we film this on Thursday morning, the metrics for the bridge phase, like you said, Peter, 70% of folks 65 and over getting vaccinated to reach that bridge phase, currently sitting at 66, so we're getting pretty close. However, the rest, other COVID metrics, new instances of the disease, hospital intakes, those have been trending upward for about a week and a half now. I know that the governor he's said that he's worried about this. He's also said he's worried about those new COVID variants, but that fear maybe hasn't borne out like it has in other countries, such as Europe, that's kind of experiencing a fourth wave of the disease. So what are if things really blow up here and we experience a resurgence and are not quite able to meet that bridge phase or, going to phase 5, do you think that has political ramifications for the governor? Especially now that we consider his re-election campaign
Sure.
is going to kick off any day now.
Yeah, I mean, we're essentially a year away from, the March primary. And so it is, he will be judged by how the state is doing a year from this fall. I mean, there's absolutely no question about that. And, what the economy looks like. And that's going to be, where we are with the virus, and people's perception of the virus are going to be huge. I mean, we've got two competing dynamics. We've got the Miami Beach, you've got people out there who have never really taken this seriously, who are just dying to get out and to do things that may have adverse public health effects. And then you've got, certainly people my age in terms of, the reaction to what's been going on. Restaurants can be open at 100% capacity. It doesn't mean that people are going to go. I mean, and so there's going to be those breaks on the economy coming back. And when you get either the virus flares up or you get human behavior flare up in ways that make people feel uneasy, then they're not going to be willing to participate. And we really don't know the long-term effects of the shift from shopping in stores to shopping online, in terms of if you go into a big box store, you're going to see an impact on inventory. There's not as much stuff out on the shelves because they've been, they haven't had to have it out on the shelf. And it's going to be interesting to see how we respond to that. The governor is going to get, he will own the situation regardless of where it is, but it's, it has to be a concern. And I think people generally give him pretty good marks at this point, but it's going to be a dominant issue if things, particularly if things aren't going well.
And Peter, our surrounding states, for the most part, have had looser restrictions at a lot of points in time in the pandemic. Indiana, for example, their mask mandate is kind of downshifting to a mere mask advisory on April 6th. But Indiana has also been pretty successful in getting vaccines out, and I believe that they're going to start offering them to all Hoosiers 16 and up, I believe next week. When we look at Indiana, Iowa, that never truly had a mask mandate, Missouri, those border states, they're always a topic of conversation when we talk about Illinois policy, because it's just so easy to compare because we have 5 bordering states. Do you think that as we near this end of the pandemic, fingers crossed, that the border states will become, an even more kind of, how do I want to say this, like topic where we can't help but follow because it'll become too toxic for us to not, and too risky to our economy to not?
I don't know. People like to compare and contrast states. I think it's worth remembering when you talk about Missouri that one of the reasons the Metro East area had such severe problems for a long time was there were so many people crossing the river back and forth between St. Louis and the East St. Louis area. And, on the Missouri side, there were virtually no controls. And that spilled over into Illinois. I have a lot of family in Missouri over toward Kansas City. And I can tell they complained to me that Missouri basically has no plan. It's very difficult getting lined up for vaccines over there. I'm not sure that those comparisons, just because their economy is more open and just because there are fewer public health mandates, doesn't mean they're weathering the storm any better than Illinois is right now. Illinois is unique. We have 2 very large urban metropolitan areas between Chicago and St. Louis, and then a lot of cities the size of Springfield or Rockford or Peoria, places like that. So it's a very different situation here. And just think, states need to manage their response according to their own conditions. And I think that's what Illinois has done.
And Kent, speaking of the governor's political chances, the governor did, kind of a 1-year reflection on this pandemic. He went around and spoke to many reporters, including myself, including Capital News Illinois. And, he gave the standard politician line that he's focused on governing, not focused on his reelection. I don't see saying, oh, gotcha to that. Every politician says that. However, come to find out after that long week of, profiles on the governor and his pandemic year, that he had actually a few days prior put in $35 million to his reelection campaign. Now that was just a few days before what would be the one, looking forward to the primary election 2022. So it didn't quite bust the caps of this 2009, I believe, election law that we put in place to kind of get money out of politics. But it seems that folks have decided, yeah, that law is in place, but we're just going to exploit it. So can you explain that law and what this means?
Sure. We have contribution limits that apply to people running at office at every level. But we also have triggers that waive those limits. If you're in a situation where a candidate is self-financing and there are triggers, it's $250,000 for a governor's race, then if you're not the self-funder, then the limits come off for you and you can compete and take bigger contributions. The other, and it can either be a direct contribution or it can be a loan. And so you can have skin in the game where you're actually putting your own money in the campaign and you can't get it back, or you can loan the campaign and then have the campaign can later on repay your loan. The other way it happens is with independent expenditures. And again, if someone spends $100,000 to support my opponent in a legislative race, then I can ignore the that waives the contribution limits for myself. What the governor has done is put money into his campaign he can operate with without opening up the ability of anyone that wants to run against him to raise money. Governor Rauner did exactly the same thing. And so we think of these waivers, these triggers as being defensive, but the way the governor is using it, the way that Governor Rauner used it, it's essentially offensive. It's putting money in your campaign, but you're not paying the price in terms of taking the limits off of potential opponents. And just, this is a system where we limit private money coming into the system. But once it gets into the system, particularly in terms of party groups, it moves very, very freely. And the self-funding and the independent expenditure waivers allow particularly legislative leaders and people running for constitutional office to be able to receive huge contributions. So it's a system that, it has some impact, but it's pretty permeable. If you want to get money into the system and can't figure out how to do it, you're probably not trying very hard in terms of the way the system runs. So at some point, the governor will put more money into his campaign, and that will allow anybody running against him to raise contributions without limit. But right now, by doing it 3 days before the deadline, he's got a pot of money he can work with, and everybody else is raising money, under the limits that are about $60,000 for a PAC or, $20,000 for a corporation. It's a huge advantage, but he's got $3.3 billion. It's, he's going to have a huge advantage regardless of whether he manipulates, he games the campaign finance system.
Right, exactly. And we've also seen legislative leaders kind of figure out this game too, at least since 2016. I want to say, Mike Madigan was the first legislative leader to break the caps with, I think it's like $100,001. And then, that gives you an advantage for your caucus, and other leaders have figured that out too. But it seems like I don't hear much of an appetite from folks to get back into campaign finance rejiggering, at least right now. So I guess we're in for a couple more rounds of pretty expensive campaigns. We'll see. But
we're spending a lot of attention not doing anything about ethics. So we don't have time not to do anything about campaign finance. So
right. And it's funny. When ethics reform was kind of a big hot topic pre-pandemic in January and February of last year, I think people had asked well, why not wrap campaign finance into this? And I want to say that leaders from both parties were kind of well, that's a separate issue, because no one really wants to give up their advantage. And speaking of COVID, in-person fundraisers are really the way that business is done in Springfield. And these Monday night fundraisers, which is also kind of a interesting relic of the last time that we did campaign finance reform, because technically you're not supposed to have fundraisers in Sangamon County, during a legislative week. So they say, okay, well, Monday nights. But Republicans especially have been kind of pushing the envelope on doing in-person fundraisers, because, that's a main source of how they things done. And Zoom fundraisers, I'm hearing from a lot of lobbyists and lawmakers that they are no fun because you're already on Zoom all day. But I want to get to something else. it is deadline week, traditionally a pretty busy week in the Capitol, but only the Senate is here in person this week. The House is continuing to do their mostly remote online committee work. But I want to talk about two kind of notable bills because I feel like they're emblematic of this kind of, more progressive wave of, lawmaking that we've seen in Illinois recently. Peter, you wrote about this week, a bill that would allow inmates in prison to vote. Tell me about that. And, I think it's very interesting because comes at a time that we are seeing other states kind of clamp down on voting access. So what does this mean, both to the bill, but also just the progressive movement that we've seen here in Illinois?
Yeah, the bill would repeal an existing statute that prohibits people who are currently incarcerated or on a work release program or on furlough from voting. And that's in accordance with the Illinois Constitution, which also provides the same thing. And so Representative LaShawn Ford from the Chicago area wants to take the first step in allowing inmates to vote. And I think the argument in favor of it is that these people, well, first of all, that it's racially discriminatory because roughly half of the prison population is Black, even though only about 14% of the general population is Black. And that these kinds of, taking away people's voting rights was inherently racist to begin with. The argument against it, I believe, and it was only an informational hearing to get the bill out there and educate people. There wasn't really any vocal opposition at that hearing. But the argument is that if you commit a serious crime and you're sentenced to prison, you have to give up certain rights and privileges of citizenship. You give up your freedom and you give up your right to vote. I think the proponents would argue that these people are going to get back out of prison eventually, and you want them to feel a connection to the rest of society, and allowing them to participate in the political process is one way toward that. So I imagine once it comes up for a vote, if it comes up for a vote, it's going to be a lot more contentious than this one hearing was.
Sure. And this also goes along with a principle in that massive criminal justice reform package that was, pushed by the Black Caucus during lawmakers' lame duck session, that would eliminate so-called prison gerrymandering. It wouldn't take effect until 2030, so it wouldn't happen for this next remap process, which is beginning this year, this spring, really. But it's this principle that folks who are, incarcerated, if they are from Joliet, if they're from Chicago, but they get sent down to, a prison in Southern Illinois, that they should not count toward the population of Southern Illinois to a, congressional or legislative district. And so this is, settled. Like I said, it won't take effect, but it's this vein of more progressive, rights for prisoners and things of that nature. We also, related to voting, last Thursday evening, which would have been after this program was filmed for last week, the House approved a bill that would kind of make permanent voting options that were made available for the 2020 election. Things like curbside voting and, being able to cast your ballot in a drop box and not have to go in, things because of the pandemic, and make it more permanent. But, it seems like there's a lot of appetite for Democrats and, quite frankly, from a lot of voters to make those things permanent. But of course, Republicans say, not so fast. We have not very much time remaining, but Kent, this progressive wave that we've seen, do you expect it to continue? And like when we see trends on the national level, just like 30 seconds here, what's your take on how national politics will continue to affect Illinois Democrats, Republican parties?
Most of what's being pushed nationally is trying to deal with expanding voting access. The things that it would require states to do, Illinois already does. I mean, we have moved, if you look at where we've come legislatively in the last 2 decades, we are a very different state and a very progressive state. Now, we are certainly divided between northeastern Illinois and downstate Illinois, but there's no reason to believe, given the huge majorities that the Democrats have in the control of the executive branch, that this is going to continue. We're arguing about things on the margin because we already do all of the things that the Democrats want to do nationally with voting rights.
All right, well, we are all out of time for Capitol View for this week. I want to thank my guests, Kent Redfield and Peter Hancock. I'm Hannah Meisel, and we'll catch you next week.